When one of Wall Street's most influential voices sounds the alarm, the world listens. Jamie Dimon, who leads J.P. Morgan Chase as its chief executive, recently delivered a message that should concern every American. His warning was direct and unambiguous. The United States has become dangerously dependent on overseas production networks, and without immediate corrective action, the nation faces a crisis in its ability to manufacture essential goods domestically. Think about that for a moment. When even the titans of global finance are raising red flags about America's industrial capacity, we're witnessing something profound. This isn't political rhetoric or campaign messaging. This is a fundamental alarm about the country's economic foundation. The evidence is mounting everywhere you look. The manufacturing capabilities that once formed the backbone of American prosperity are eroding at an accelerating rate. Consider what happened in October of this year. More than 150,000 workers across the country received pink slips. To put that in perspective, it marked the most devastating October for employment losses in over 2 decades. These weren't minor adjustments or seasonal fluctuations. These were seismic shifts that rippled through entire communities. The damage spans multiple sectors. Distribution centers and logistics facilities, which provided stable middle-class employment for countless families, eliminated tens of thousands of positions. The technology sector, often touted as America's competitive advantage, cut more than 33,000 jobs in just 30 days. And the hemorrhaging hasn't stopped. Over the past 10 months, the economy has shed more than 1 million positions, a dramatic acceleration compared to the previous year. Corporate investment has frozen. Hiring pipelines have dried up. Towns that were built around manufacturing plants and technology campuses are experiencing a hollowing effect. Storefronts are going dark. Families are relocating in search of opportunities. Communities that thrived for generations are slowly fading from relevance. This isn't an abstract economic theory. If you earn a paycheck, if you have investments, or if you purchase products made on American soil, these trends directly impact your life. And there's a cautionary tale unfolding across the Atlantic that should capture everyone's attention. Britain is experiencing an industrial collapse in real time. Automobile production has fallen to levels not seen in 73 years. Manufacturing facilities are shuttering their doors permanently. Tens of thousands of workers are losing their livelihoods. The combination of exorbitant energy expenses and burdensome taxation has made domestic production economically unviable. What's transpiring in the United Kingdom isn't an isolated phenomenon. It's reverberating through the American economy as well. This serves as a stark warning that the United States cannot afford to dismiss. If current trajectories continue unchanged, America could follow an identical path. It could transform from a dominant industrial force into a nation that has forgotten the fundamental skills of making things. The consequences extend far beyond unemployment statistics. This could fundamentally undermine the economic security of America's middle class, the very foundation of social stability and prosperity. Before we dive deeper into these troubling developments, I want to encourage you to subscribe and activate notifications. Understanding these realities before they become irreversible is crucial. Now, let's examine the details. The British collapse. A preview of America's possible future. Right now, the United Kingdom is experiencing an industrial unraveling that should serve as a wake-up call. The data tells a disturbing story. Manufacturing output continues to contract. In September of this year, the Purchasing Managers' Index for manufacturing dropped to 46.2, its weakest reading in 5 months. For those unfamiliar with this metric, any figure below 50 indicates contraction rather than growth. Industries that require substantial energy inputs, including paper production, metallurgy, and chemical manufacturing, have plummeted to levels not witnessed in 35 years. When factories cease operations, employment opportunities evaporate. When employment opportunities evaporate, entire communities begin to deteriorate. This isn't a future scenario. It's happening right now, This extends beyond Britain's borders. When industrial workers in both the United Kingdom and the United States lose manufacturing positions, it signals a larger global transformation, the ascendance of China as the world's manufacturing superpower. China currently accounts for nearly 29% of global manufacturing output, surpassing the United States, Europe, or any other geographic region. Meanwhile, Britain's contribution to worldwide manufacturing value has continued its steep decline. Here's the critical question. If the UK and US are abandoning production, who's filling that void? The answer is China. When Western industrial capacity fades, global demand for goods doesn't disappear. People still need electronics, automotive components, and countless other products. Increasingly, those items are manufactured in China. The striking element in all of this is how current American economic policies are failing to address these challenges effectively. Despite numerous promises and bold declarations, the economic strategy being pursued is showing clear signs of failure. The administration is squandering an opportunity that could have strengthened the country's industrial foundation. Take Michigan as a prime example, a state specifically targeted for manufacturing revival. Political leaders vowed to restore factories and create jobs, but the actual results tell a different story. Research from the University of Michigan demonstrates that manufacturing employment continues to decline, particularly in transportation equipment production. Since 2023, the state has hemorrhaged approximately 23,900 factory positions, contributing to a total loss exceeding 80,000 jobs over the past year. New tariffs on steel and aluminum imports could eliminate another 2,300 automotive jobs by 2026. The very policies designed to protect workers are instead accelerating layoffs. Then consider Ohio. It was described as a manufacturing treasure trove, yet it ranks among the worst states for factory job losses. Since the turn of the millennium, Ohio has lost hundreds of thousands of manufacturing positions. Economic analysts indicate that new industrial growth is no longer gravitating toward the Rust Belt. Instead, it's migrating to the Sun Belt states in the South. In summary, the states that were supposed to exemplify industrial resurgence are actually shrinking. Tariffs, policy uncertainty, elevated energy costs, and workforce skill gaps are driving employment elsewhere. Michigan and Ohio aren't experiencing revival. They're experiencing retreat. The bold rhetoric about restoring American greatness collides with harsh reality in the heartland's factory towns. If this approach cannot deliver results in the very regions where it was supposed to succeed, what are the prospects for national improvement? The primary strategy appears to be blanket tariffs without a comprehensive implementation plan. It's the same mistake Britain made when it followed Washington's guidance instead of rebuilding industries to serve its own population. Let's examine the American situation more closely. The alarm bells are ringing across American manufacturing. In October of this year, American employers announced the elimination of 153,000 jobs, the worst October for workforce reductions in more than 2 decades. The pace of cuts surged approximately 175% compared to October of the previous year, and nearly tripled the number from September. These losses aren't randomly distributed across the economy. They're concentrated in the sectors most vulnerable to disruption. Technology companies eliminated over 33,000 positions in October alone, up from just a few thousand the previous month. Warehousing and logistics operations, which experienced explosive growth during the pandemic, cut nearly 48,000 positions as automation advances and overcapacity issues take their toll. Retail chains are facing brutal pressure as well. Declining consumer spending, store closures, and rising operational costs are forcing massive workforce reductions. We're witnessing what could be described as a profound policy miscalculation unfolding in real time. The warning signals couldn't be more evident, yet Washington characterizes this as economic recovery. If this represents recovery, what would actual collapse look like? Manufacturing deteriorates further amid failed trade negotiations. First, consider the situation with trade negotiations involving Canada and Mexico under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, known as USMCA. The Office of the United States Trade Representative has been conducting talks that are raising serious concerns. There have been repeated threats to reimpose tariffs, creating uncertainty that has pushed Canada and Mexico to strengthen their bilateral relationship instead of deepening ties with the United States. Canada's leadership recently acknowledged that discussions with Washington have stalled and will now be absorbed into the USMCA review process. Rather than securing America's strategic position, current policies appear to be eroding influence with two of the nation's closest trading partners. The outcome is clear. The United States is losing credibility, while others are building cooperation. Trade agreements aren't merely diplomatic exercises. They determine where manufacturing facilities are established, who gains employment, and which nation positions itself for future economic success. Then there's the China situation. High-profile summit meetings were held and agreements were announced as victories. But beneath the surface, those deals are superficial, conditional, and far from durable. Expert analysis has warned that the agreement with China exposed the limitations of the tariff-based approach, essentially returning to square one. Yes, China made token gestures, purchasing some American soybeans and relaxing certain export restrictions. But these aren't the structural transformations needed to reduce America's dependency or address its trade imbalance. More concerning, experts indicate that Beijing retains the strategic advantage and is executing a more sophisticated long-term strategy. China allows American leaders to claim victory while maintaining its leverage. Where does this leave the United States? It's being compressed from two directions. With Canada and Mexico drifting away, the North American trade alliance is fragile. With China offering minor concessions while refusing to yield genuine power in critical sectors, from rare earth minerals to advanced technology, the U.S. remains in a vulnerable position. Bold proclamations about spectacular deals and restoring American jobs ring hollow when allies aren't aligned and competitors continue to outmaneuver American strategy. Without a coherent long-term vision, not merely tariff theater, conditions won't improve. They'll continue deteriorating. The United States may soon confront shrinking manufacturing capacity, diminished bargaining power, and escalating economic vulnerability. Complete collapse hasn't occurred yet, but if current trends persist, the trajectory is dangerously unsustainable. Let's return to the United Kingdom, a nation further along the path of industrial decline. What began decades ago in textile mills and shipbuilding yards is now concluding with quiet closures and fractured supply networks. Britain is becoming the first major economy to fully deindustrialize. According to economic analysts, the UK has lost enormous portions of its factory infrastructure. In certain sectors, output has regressed to 1950s levels. Towns that were constructed around manufacturing are now empty shells. Why should Americans care? Because the trajectory is starting to look remarkably similar. Rising input costs, weak investment, and policy paralysis, all contributing to industrial contraction. The United States is entering that same danger zone. If you reside in a manufacturing region, you're already witnessing it firsthand. In Britain, they lost the factories, the supplier networks, and the skilled workforce. Reconstruction requires decades. America still possesses advantages, but only if decisive action is taken immediately. Without intervention, the same pattern will replicate itself here. Fewer production facilities, fewer employment opportunities, weaker regional economies, lower productivity, and heavier tax burdens. While the UK government was preoccupied with international commitments, American policymakers are following the same script, allocating resources heavily abroad while the domestic industrial foundation quietly erodes. Britain demonstrates what transpires when a nation stops building. America is now walking the identical road. The shipping collapse, a critical warning sign. Meanwhile, the United States faces another crisis that compounds these challenges. Currently, one of the most striking indicators of economic trouble is the collapse in shipping and cargo traffic between China and the United States. According to recent reporting, the number of container vessels en route from China to American ports has plummeted to approximately 41 ships, the lowest level since February of last year, representing a decline of roughly 42% in just 3 weeks from already depressed levels. Even more alarming, the volume of TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units, the standard shipping containers, being transported from Asia to U.S. ports has fallen to the lowest levels recorded in over a year. Each empty shipping lane represents a snapshot of America's slowing economy. Chinese exports globally declined 1.1% in October, driven primarily by a 25% drop in shipments specifically to the United States. Why is this frightening? Because when trade flows constrict this severely, it undermines manufacturing operations, warehouse employment, transportation networks, port jobs, global supply chains, and ultimately consumer access to goods. A nation like the United States depends not only on producing things, but also on moving things efficiently. When that system stalls, the consequences cascade rapidly. The fact that China's shipments to the U.S. are declining, while China simultaneously diversifies its export markets toward Southeast Asia and Africa, sends an unmistakable signal. The United States is losing competitive ground. The ramifications include fewer employment opportunities, fewer contracts, idle infrastructure assets, potential price increases, and product shortages. This isn't a future projection. This is unfolding in the present moment. The fact that these logistics indicators are flashing red should alarm anyone paying attention to economic fundamentals. Now, consider the negotiations with two of America's closest neighboring trading partners, Canada and Mexico, plus a potential new agreement with Switzerland. These discussions were supposed to anchor American manufacturing recovery by securing affordable raw materials, stable supply chains, and favorable export channels. Instead, they're dragging on inconclusively, demonstrating that the U.S. is failing to secure strategic trade advantages. This week, the Office of the United States Trade Representative announced ongoing discussions with Swiss officials and representatives from Mexico, while broader liberalization talks remain vague and incomplete. The claim that Switzerland is eager to invest in American sectors like aircraft manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, and gold refining might sound encouraging, but such negotiations should already have concrete frameworks established, not just interested investors. Meanwhile, Mexico and Canada, historically reliable trading partners under the USMCA framework, are now forced to renegotiate under conditions of pressure and uncertainty. Here's the concerning reality. When your trading allies begin to hesitate, when your export channels remain unsecured, and when your import costs rise, you're exposing your entire manufacturing foundation to systemic risk. Leaders promised industrial revival and backbone industry resurgence, but instead there's waiting, negotiating, yet not delivering. The delays mean employment opportunities remain uncreated, factories remain idle, and domestic production stays dependent on what other nations will permit. Combine that with poorly calibrated tariffs and unstable policy signals, and you have the perfect conditions for manufacturing weakness. The United States isn't merely losing the battle for jobs, it's also losing the strategic positioning necessary to manufacture domestically, not simply for today, but for years into the future. Factories can be rebuilt, but only if leadership stops repeating identical mistakes. The industrial infrastructure exists to be restored, but it requires vision, consistency, and genuine commitment to long-term strategic planning rather than short-term political gestures. The path forward. What happens next? So where does this leave us? The parallels between Britain's industrial decline and America's current trajectory are impossible to ignore. Both nations followed similar patterns: over-reliance on service sectors, neglect of manufacturing infrastructure, policy inconsistency, and an assumption that industrial capacity could be easily outsourced and then recovered when needed. History demonstrates that's not how industrial capacity works. Once you lose the factories, you lose the supplier networks. Once you lose the suppliers, you lose the skilled workforce. Once you lose the skilled workforce, you lose the institutional knowledge required to manufacture complex products. And once all of that is gone, rebuilding takes not months or years, but decades, if it can be accomplished at all. The American economy stands at a crossroads. One path leads toward continued industrial erosion, growing dependence on foreign production, vulnerability to supply chain disruptions, and the gradual hollowing out of the middle class that has historically provided social stability and political moderation. The other path requires acknowledging these realities and implementing comprehensive strategies that go beyond tariff announcements and trade war rhetoric. It requires substantial investment in infrastructure, workforce development, energy policy reform, and consistent long-term industrial strategy that survives beyond election cycles. The question isn't whether America can afford to take decisive action. The question is whether America can afford not to. Because every month of delay, every quarter of policy drift, every year of strategic confusion brings the nation closer to the point of no return. The point where Britain finds itself today, watching its industrial heritage dissolve into history. The workers losing their jobs in Michigan and Ohio aren't statistics. They're families, they're communities. They're the human cost of policy failures and strategic miscalculations. The empty shipping containers that should be carrying American exports aren't just economic indicators. They're symbols of diminishing global relevance and eroding productive capacity. Jamie Dimon's warning wasn't alarmist, it was realistic. America is in danger of forgetting how to build. And a nation that forgets how to build is a nation that has forgotten what made it powerful in the first place. The manufacturing crisis unfolding across the United States and the United Kingdom isn't inevitable. It's the result of choices. Choices about trade policy, industrial strategy, energy costs, workforce development, and long-term economic vision. Different choices could produce different outcomes, but time is running out. The window for reversing these trends is closing. The question is whether leadership will recognize the urgency before it's too late, or whether America will join Britain as another cautionary tale of industrial decline, a once dominant manufacturing power that forgot how to make things and paid the price for that amnesia in diminished prosperity, weakened communities, and lost opportunities for future generations. That's the reality we're facing. That's the choice before us. And that's why understanding these trends isn't just important. It's essential for anyone who cares about America's economic future and the livelihood of millions of working families whose futures hang in the balance. For continued coverage of these critical economic developments, make sure to subscribe to the channel and stay informed about what's coming next. Because whether we acknowledge it or not, the manufacturing crisis is here, it's real, and it's accelerating.